conference, which is called Ruby Midwest. I am Australian, so I now live in San Francisco, so I looked at the map and I thought, this is going to be awesome. Yes, I'm coming. Ruby Midwest? Of course. That's just up the road. That'd be sweet. I'm sick and tired of traveling from country to country. And I got that wrong, so I thought, no, okay, so how do I do this Midwest business? So this is the middle of the West. I was pretty lost by now. So in my agile fashion of what's next, I looked briefly at the invite and I said I was in Kansas. And it was Kansas City in Missouri. So it's taken me a while to get here. And so at some point I had to ask the question, how this possibly is called the Midwest. So for me it's been an actual safari. With cows. You're already thinking there can't possibly be more memes in this. Oh yes there can. And that's how. So here we are at a conference, and it's now 2011. So unlike a lot of us, when we first learned Ruby, we all came to the first RailsConf, and there was like, who's making money from Ruby and Rails, and there's very few people. But now we all do, and as projects, they have money, and we have to make decisions on how to spend that money. You might never think of it like that, but trust me, your boss does. And your boss is thinking in this fashion. He's thinking, I could spend the money on features, or I could spend it on sort of the other aspect of the performance aspects. Now, if you want to add resources, you want to get more performance, you want your app to hum, you could press in App Cloud the Add button, which is a tremendous button, and when you do that, it costs you money. Certainly my manager's not too thrilled for me to make that very distinct association. Press it some more times and it costs you more money, just in case you're wondering. And but nonetheless, so you're probably wondering, well, this is how I think. There's still a university student in me that wants free beer and certainly free internet and free performance. So I was always very interested in how, for as little money as possible, how I can get good performance. So this is kind of in the back of my mind constantly. And so I work at Engineer now, and a lot of people have been on the event machine, doing other things and performance and threading or whatever. So I was getting a little bit sick and tired of all these random conversations on Twitter that are interesting to follow, but sort of hard to get to the guts of. So what I did was I organised a very last minute RubyConf, which could have been called Concurrency Conf, and it was sort of the back end of RailsConf, and it was really good. We flew some people in, we had some people do some videos, prepared videos that they gave us, and I think they had a packed room of 50 or something people. So I've learned all these things, and I went and read some research papers. There's a way to spend some quality time. And I thought, it's unfair if I do all this and I don't tell you about it. And I thought, well, I could do this one of two ways. I can tell it in such a way that I come out very clever, or I could do it in such a way that I come out very funny. And more importantly, or I could give you just the answer. Like, you're here writing Ruby, it's great. What's the one thing I could do? Not what's the 50 things you could do under 50 different edge case circumstances. What's the one thing you could do? And so I want to give you the one thing. So we talked about adding resources. And whilst that's a thing you could do, let's see what else we can do. And so the goal for me is I just want to write code. I don't want to be thinking, I love James's talk because, you just have one pattern for things. Wrap up, try to have APIs that don't ship nils. Wrap up things that might ship nils such a way they never ship nils, and now you never have to think about it. So you're just trying to lower the cost of thinking. And all I want to think about is my application. So I'm going to give you a solution, a plan for how to think about this stuff. Should I use evented? Should I use threads? And how's my code fit in that? And here it is! And if you forget to write this down, I will show it about a half a dozen times more. Keep an eye out for it. All right, now you think, well, that's great. What does that mean? Well, here is the thing you should do next example. Like, this is the money shot. I think that's rude, actually. There's a better way of saying that. This is what you paid money for. You know, it's great. You paid some money to come to this conference. Personally, I think this is worth, if you have not doing this, I mean, think about how much money you spend running web apps specifically. And a lot of what I'm talking about is web app focus, because you get an interesting side effect of when it comes to threaded. But you're probably spending lots of money. You do this, you spend less money, it paid for the conference. And everyone else is free. Not that they weren't valuable. Actually, it's been really, really good. I've actually thoroughly enjoyed this conference. All right, so what is evented? Evented is where you arrange I/O. Now, I would like to say orchestrate I/O, but there's a cost to that. In this case, I have to have a smaller font. And I'd rather have a bigger font than spend 30 seconds explaining it. Threads is where you're going to do actual work. That's an interesting premise. What that means is, in evented, you can't do work. So, if you're building any evented apps, whether in Ruby or that other thing that's very popular, you can't do work. And we'll talk about why. So, and what you want to do is write code. So here's the solution, just in case you forgot to write the notes down. Here is the bits and pieces you're going to use for your app, and you're going to write code at the bottom. So, we want to use resources better. Let's talk about concurrency. This is how we're going to get, well, I use resource utilization. Now you might think, why would I, I work in engine yard. I sell memory for a living. I mean, CPU, memory, we charge for it, it's good. Good business, you should do it. And specifically with me, not in competition. That wouldn't be no fun at all. So let's see how we can use our resources better. Let's compare the two sort of similar. And certainly in the Ruby space, we've all gone down the top one and we've not investigated, spent a lot of time convincing ourselves about the second one. So let's talk about process concurrency. If you want to have one request at a time, that's going to take one process, and a Rails app might be between 50 and 150 meg. Memory's cheap until you have a need to scale up. Actually, there was a really good tweet the other day that sort of joked around this. What was it? No, memory's cheap until you double it every week. That's it. So, 100 requests. Expensive. Yeah. What do you think out loud? All right, how do we the concurrency is orchestrated by the kernel. A couple of example app stacks, Unicorn, Passenger, Mongrel cluster is an example of how you get concurrency there. The threaded concurrency, which you might never have done. You get one request is one thread. Now, how much overhead there is a thread? I just need a number. You might say, well, it's probably 250K, but you start getting a lot of reuses. And it's a number that's substantially smaller in reality. So 100 requests is still just the cost of one process. That's pretty cool. What that means is that you're sort of bound not by memory anymore, really. You understand this is you're going to be bound by something else like CPU. So now you get to grow a lot and use your CPUs a lot better. All right. We'll come back to Mongrel. So, summary. One request is cheap. Take notes. In case you're not following the logic. It's very simple logic, just a lot of hand gestures. And here is a very dodgy image that I took from Google Images. When you search for winner, I guess, I can't remember now. But it looked really cheap and nasty, and I thought that'll do. So that's why threads. That's why threads instead of processes, because you get the code reuse and all that sort of stuff is now, you're not duplicating your memory footprint. You get to be bound by something else. Now, educational lesson. Anyone speak sign language? What's that stand for?
WTF.
WTF. But in code. It's not rude. And what's interesting about this is that if you're going to swear, you need a friend, because it's got 3 fingers. Hands. It's only got 2. I don't know how deaf people can do what they do with only 2 hands. Anyway, okay, so we talked about mention Mongrel, and who still runs an app under Mongrel? 1. Okay, so 2. So it's noteworthy why I didn't mention it. Let alone talk about the concurrency. But I have something interesting to show you. Code there proof. Has thread.new in it, it's threaded. So anyway. If you don't use it, what's the point? We'll come back to it. This is what, here is Dr. Nick's guide to is something thread concurrent potential business. Okay, so it needs a better name. And so the premise is if everything's thread safe or has threading enabled, I just had as a graph, a logo that I took from somewhere, and it says thread safe, you get the gist. So Mongrel has threading as available. But in 2006, when Rails came out, it was not thread safe because it just wasn't important. Like, what's the point? Because Ruby's not thread safe, or it doesn't have threads. So let's explore what happened over the last 5 years. In 2008, Rails 2.2 came out, and it was the first thread-safe Rails ever. Hooray! No one used it for that, which is a bit sad, and we'll talk about how you use it. But all you have to do, ever since 2008, is you add this somewhere. Production.rb in your environment. You do that, you've got threading. Booyah! Budget time. You know, start asking for a raise. Look how much money I saved. Now, if you're in Sinatra and you're going to need to write this down, you need to add this line somewhere. The hash, very important. The error message, not very relevant. So we're getting close. Rails is thread safe, Sinatra, Mongrel, we're good. So let's look at Ruby's. 1.86 wasn't, 1.87 wasn't, 1.92 came out last year. It's got 90 threads. Woohoo! Yeah! I don't need to have this talk. Problem is, a sad face can only run Ruby once at a time, which is an interesting interpretation of native threads. And the special mechanism that they achieve this tremendous feature is called the GIL, and it has a sad face as part of its and I like to call it the grumpy GIL. So sadly, even in 2010 and as of 2011 with 1.93 that just came out, it's exactly the same. Just not worth another slide. So here we are, threaded, thread safe, but no threads, sad face. So you might think, well, what's the point? Okay, we had this conversation. Do we move on to Evented now? Is this why everyone's excited about Evented? No, people are excited about Evented for other reasons. So threads, we have them. In fact, Mac Ruby also has GIL-less and has threads. So, but how many people run Mac Ruby in production? So. But these two. So how do you get JRuby? That was pretty simple. And in fact, as of Rails 3.1, if you're in JRuby at the time you run Rails new myapp, it will come ready to run in JRuby for the first time. And what that means is that your gem file has this sort of thing in it. So they're the sort of bare basics that you need. And if you pick a different database adapter, it'll change to be appropriate. So that's very cool. Most super cool, as you could probably guess my enthusiasm by now, is we're all green. And Dr. Nick's maths of concurrency say that we can use thread concurrency, which gives us this, which means you save money and you get the pay raise that I was suggesting. And if you don't get the pay raise, you just come to me and we'll figure something out. I have no idea what that scheme's going to look like. It's going to be dodgy. So how do I use JRuby and Rails? A thing called Trinidad. This is what we use in production, and the reason we use it in production is because it's really good in development mode, because it has a little command line app, and pretty much it looks like every other, because JRuby isn't about Java, it's about a Ruby implementation, which, and this is just a secret, if you use JRuby, and this you might not care, it's a feature, you can use it, you can not use it, it's just an option. If you want, you can use some Java code. Now, I don't want to make you, but it's purely an option. By default, it's disabled. So, JRuby is about running Ruby. Hence, 4 of the 5 letters in the name are the word Ruby. An example app, purely letter. That's just the one we put up an app to run, and it has JRuby sort of enabled. So if you're running JRuby, that works. By default, so if you run in development mode, for example, or if you have the thread safe thing commented out, it uses, essentially when it pulls it to when it's basically a wraparound Tomcat. Tomcat has 5 JRuby runtimes. That's your process concurrency. put on threadsafe mode, booyah! 1 JRuby and threads. And that was it. Woo! Hard day's done. Time for the pub. No, we're not here because you'd, it's all shut. In Kansas City, if you wanted a coffee, for example, you have to wait till Monday. And so we get that. So it's all just normal app code you're writing. None of the mysteriousness of threading and thread safety because it's a web app. So let's talk about that. You're saying I'm scared of threads. Okay, you're not going to say that out loud. You're going to say something silly like, I don't like Java. Whatever. But see, web apps are sort of implicitly thread safe. And so what I've written for you is Nick's Joy of Concurrency. A very picturesque volume about concurrency. But fun, the summary is you store state somewhere else unless it's safe. And that's pretty much, if you do that, then you're thread safe. I mean, and in web apps you do. You don't leave data lying around for the next request to come through. It's stateless. You put it in a database. You've done it already. How easy was that? Whew. Another hard day's work. Come on to the pub. You're thinking, so the next question you might ask, well, what about all my libraries? Good question. So you go to Rails plugins and click on the little thread safety button. There are libraries that declare themselves thread safe. Easy peasy. Well, that was fun. Let's move on. All right, so you do that. You're going to use Trinidad, and but in the back of your mind, you've opted to come to this session. You're doing something else, I don't know. And you've come to hear about Event Machine. Event is cool, threads are not, and I haven't even heard of that thing once. Let's talk about this. So what is evented? Evented is basically, it's a loop. You've heard of loops. And it loops over things that might have some I.O. It says, do you have any I.O.? And if you do, it does something with it. That's the point. And remember, and I decided for the sake of brevity to rip out every other slide about evented. It's just not that relevant. I mean, the point of this talk is that if you're asking the question evented versus threaded, I answered it. And I'm not going to justify why. You have work to do. You wrote a web app. So let's talk about one of the real cases in a web app where you're going to be doing sort of IO-bound things. The request comes in and it might be like a page cache or some sort of content cache, files, etc. You ask the question. If it's a miss, go to the web app. If it hits, well, let's move this to make this IO work. Okay? So it's outside our app. You may have seen this pattern before. I didn't make it up. I just put it on a pretty slide. This is evented work. Our real work is inside our threads, and we're going to do this with a thing called nginx. It's pretty cool. Who uses nginx? Who knows how to configure it? That's the implicit part. If you're going to use it, and it's great for many reasons. There's a graph of goodness that shows how much less memory it uses. As it gets lots of concurrency, and that was request per second. This one is its flatline memory, which is one of the great benefits of evented things. But when you start to think evented versus threaded, you're talking about optimization questions. And I challenge you that most aren't going to be solved with evented, they're going to be solved with threads. And if you do have some IO stuff, pull it out at the front, or pull it out into separate parts. So, because I need to give you one point. We only have so much time. And I'd rather tell funny jokes. So, you put evented stuff at the front, threads, and then your app. You want to get this, obviously, amongst other places, us. If you want a job, we can come work with awesomeness and me. It's two vaguely distinct groups. You should. And so the goal, as always, I want you to be happy. Because I assume you're a lot like me, and you're starved of happiness. It's a sad world, people occupying things. It's like committing suicide without leaving a note. I'm just going to stand over here. Why? You wouldn't understand why. How much time have I got to tell someone else a joke? That's worth it. So, there's an Irish comedian, Ed Byrne, and he has this bit about So you're sitting with your girlfriend, your wife, and you're watching TV, and you just say something stupid, something that only a man would say, like, "Yes, that's right. Women should be locked up in the kitchen." Something really well thought out like that. And then she, all of a sudden changes, but you don't know why. She's looking at you differently. The vibe is different, and you say to her, "What's wrong? What happened? What's going on?" And she says, and sing it with me, "If you don't know what you've done, there's no point me telling you." What sort of logic is that? Well, that's a lot like saying, if you're hungry, there's no point me making any dinner. It's the same logic. So there's Occupy people. I'm sure they're doing it all for the right reason. Where it happens to be. So, your code wrapped up in threads. Your code, just normal code doing normal things in a thread-safe fashion, which is implicit. Put any event and stuff at the front, and there's some things I think you should use. This is what we put in production. We support it as an example of why I think. There are other options. And if I'd realized, like, if the time there's a thing we're building, there's a group of people building, but certainly some of them are the rubinius team, called Puma. Pronounced Puma, or however else you pronounce it. And I don't know in America. I'm not sure what the right way is anymore. I love the Queen, and God bless the Queen. And for what it is, essentially, is a fork of Mongrel. So Mongrel, that threaded thing, Mongrel hasn't been touched since mid-last year. But as a code base, it's a great place to start. So basically, they've pulled it out of the dustbin, given it a new name, coat of paint, fixed it, changed the README, and making it work as a multi-threaded app stack, which we've never needed before because we never had a multi-threaded normal Ruby, but now we do. So they're building that. And I think they're going to put some other cool stuff in it, like that sort of ventured business. And really, so this is it. So if you wondered what the point was, and it's eluded you because of my subtlety, that's the last slide. I have one more slide because I felt that you deserved it. It's a long conference, and I felt you needed one more cow. Thank you very much. I didn't leave a lot of room for questions. I don't want any.
It's a thread thing.
Let's talk about this thread thing. What would you like to talk about? Threads are awesome. We should use them more often. Does anyone remember? Oh, sorry, go.
Standard comedy class you took a few years back helped you with your presentation.
So off the topic. So I tried. It's hard. It's hard. There's nothing harder than standing up and having no point to being there except tell jokes. Like, everything you say may as well be funny, or you may as well have not said it. And at the same time, the audience is looking at you going, "Ha, make me laugh." You don't have those same high expectations. It's a lot easier. All right, you guys are champs. Thank you very much.